Hello, everyone, and inside today's Locked On Canadians, we are talking the Jeff Petry dilemma. Is it worth keeping him? What can we expect in a trade? Where could he go in a trade? All that and more inside today's show.
You are Locked On Canadiens, your daily podcast on the Montreal Canadiens, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to episode 899 of Locked On Canadians. We are your daily Montreal Canadiens podcast brought to you by the Locked On Podcast Network, where you get your team every single day of the week, wherever you get your daily podcast, whether that be Google, Apple, Spotify, or right here on YouTube if you are watching our shining faces on this Sunday morning. And my co-host and we're kind of going fingers crossed here because the last time we recorded an episode on a Sunday morning, Kent Hughes was part of a three-way trade that ended up being actually one of our most popular emergency episodes we've ever done. So thank you so much for your support on that. I haven't introduced myself. I am your host. I am Scott Matlin. I'm joined, as always, by my fantastic co-host, the active stick, Laura Saba. And Laura, like I said, we're not hoping for a trade, but like maybe let it wait a day so we don't have to record like 2.5 episodes in one day again this time.
I think last time it kind of came out of nowhere, and I really like that. I know it was a little bit inconvenient for podcasters who'd already put their episode to bed in the morning, but I think one of the things that I really liked is how kind of out of nowhere it came. Like, it's been a weird time with this front office because the Kirby Dach trade was like, it shocked everybody, right? But then for whatever reason, whoever they pick is getting spoiled by the media. Like, there's some leaks, but it seems like this front office would prefer to remain discreet, and keep their cards close to the chest. And I think it's not too. I think it's not. You don't have to look too far to find out where in the organization the leaks are coming from. But I really like that Kent Hughes has been moving like sort of behind the scenes and really working hard to make the Canadiens the beneficiary of other people's business.
Yeah, it's in a lot of these trades are that he is cleaning off cap space in some situations. And it's funny is that I have Cap Friendly up in the background here, and I'm looking at this three-way trade. You know, he got rid of 2 contracts that they didn't really have space for in the forward group. Obviously added DeSmith, added Legare, added a second-round pick, added Petry with salary retained from Pittsburgh. He added less than $1 million in cap space, whereas the Sharks, who gave up the biggest asset in this, got 1 first-round pick and added another $2.2 million in cap. And Pittsburgh somehow lost $3 million in this deal, which is impressive work. But the biggest thing about this trade, and I think one of the things that I've just been kind of sitting and lingering on for a week because I can't really figure this out is, how did Jeff Petry agree to this? Because he has a no trade clause, and that means one of 2 things. He never updated it when he left Montreal, thinking, they're never going to trade me back to Montreal based on the way things went when I left. Or, like I said, he just didn't assume they were ever going to trade back for him based on the way the exit went there, which I'm surprised he's back, but I'm also not surprised. There was a quote from Arpon Basu last year before the trade was back in, I think it was April before, the offseason began, that he wouldn't close the door on a return to Montreal. He would talk to his family. Obviously, they added another kid in the meantime. And I wouldn't be unsurprised if he sticks around this season, even for a little bit, and then they flip him at some point during it with salary retained. But the whole thing's kind of weird because there's still portions of this fan base who think that Jeff Petry was never any good, like because he had bad plus minus or he's bad defensively, or they're still mad about him not coming to the defense of Samuel Montembeault, which we've talked about a lot. It's something. I'm very surprised that it was Jeff Petry. I wouldn't have been shocked with the Canadiens sending 2 forwards out if they had taken on a Granlund or somebody else there, and Petry went to San Jose. But Laura, based on the way things ended the first time, do you think we'll see Jeff Petry even arrive at training camp for the Canadiens this year based on the way things ended last time?
I think the chances are slim. One of the big reasons isn't even Jeff Petry related at all. It's that it doesn't solve the problem that the Montreal Canadiens have, is that they have a lot of prospects that they need to start moving into the NHL. And they got rid of Joel Edmondson, and we talked about, this is going to be it's going to be an opportunity for a young player, for a rookie to come and prove themselves. Maybe it's a chance to see who has chemistry with Caden Gooley or, something like that. And this doesn't really solve that problem. This kind of, it literally replaces that problem with just a different player, a better player for sure. And also, I don't know if it's like necessarily based on the way that he left Montreal, but rather based on the way that he played in Pittsburgh. I think that's a big thing. Like, he did not have a good year in Pittsburgh. Like, let's all talk about that. Like, let's admit that. Like, he was much better in Montreal. And I don't think Pittsburgh got the player they thought they were getting when they traded Mike Matheson for Jeff Petry and Ryan Poehling. Essentially, the Canadiens got Mike Matheson for Ryan Poehling, which is, and not only that, Mike Matheson, Ryan Poehling, and 25% less of Jeff Petry's salary, which was it 25%, 15%?
25% is what Pittsburgh is. And here's the thing is, Ryan Poehling isn't even a Pittsburgh Penguin anymore. He's a Philadelphia Flyer because he wasn't qualified.
There you go.
And the thing about Petry's season is the Penguins as a whole were a team that really struggled to figure themselves out last year. And they're banking on Erik Karlsson for the next 2 to 3 years, however long his contract is going for, to be a driving force in keeping that Crosby, Malkin, Letang window open for another potential cup run. And I don't think Petry could have given them that in this current situation, not with the way what Ron Hextall did to that team there, which is its whole own other thing here. Petry wasn't great, but I still think he's a perfectly cromulent addition to a good defensive setup there, which is why, and we'll talk about this in our next segment, I haven't shut the door entirely on, hey, Jeff Petry is a Montreal Canadien again is not the worst thing we've ever seen, but there's some finagling that needs to go with that. Pittsburgh as a whole was a very weird team last year, one that just did never put anything together consistently. And we look at their run down the stretch. They lost to the Habs 3 times over the course of the season. And
if they hadn't, they would have made the playoffs.
Yeah, and if they didn't lose to the Blackhawks and the Blue Jackets and et cetera, they were a team that did not do what they needed to. And that is not all entirely on Jeff Petry, but you look at this big trade where Matheson was a good Pittsburgh Penguin. He is now a great Montreal Canadien, and it just didn't work out in their favor with what Ron Hextall did. I think there is some value in a player like Jeff Petry, maybe not the first pairing guy that he was in Montreal. And he was a first pairing guy based on how often Shea Weber was injured. That's not really up for debate. I'm just curious if other teams have that same look around him, even if Kent Hughes is retaining salary. And I guess our next thing is in our next segment, we're going to debate, is it worth keeping him? What do we have to do to keep Jeff Petry in this lineup? Or, are we shipping him right back out the door in the coming weeks here? We're going to get into all of that and more coming up in our next segment. But first, football season is about to kick off. The preseason is underway, and FanDuel is giving you chances to win all season long, because right now, when you bet on a Super Bowl winner, you can get bonus bets every time they win in the regular season. Just pick any team to win the Super Bowl, and you'll get bonus bets for every game that they win. You can use those bonus bets on betting the spread, player props, who's going to throw the first touchdown, who's going to rush for over 100 yards, the over-under, and so much more on an app that's safe, secure, and easy to use that allows you to get paid out instantly. So visit FanDuel.com/lockedon and start earning bonus bets with America's #1 sportsbook. That's FanDuel.com/lockedon. And as always, please remember to gamble responsibly when you bet online. We are back here at Locked On Canadiens, and we've kind of come to the point that there are 2 camps of people that are still debating this trade, because there's not much else happening in hockey unless you want to talk about hockey player weddings. Do the Canadiens keep Jeff Petry, or is the proper move to ship him out? And I've been trying to weigh the interests in my head here, and I guess the first thing is, and Laura, you can, correct me if you think I'm wrong in my assertion here. If they want to keep Jeff Petry, it likely means David Savard has to go. Joel Edmondson's already out the door. Chris Weidman is the seventh defenseman, is irrelevant to this conversation. If they want to keep Jeff Petry on this roster, they have to ship David Savard out. I think that is the bare minimum, right?
Right. And in terms of quality, Jeff Petry is above David Savard. And David Savard, like, God love him, he is good at what he does, but he does not provide the same thing that Jeff Petry does. And to me, I think that's the big key. And it would be a little bit less pressure on Caden Gooley to have to carry around his defensive partner. And I think, David Savard was brought in by a different front office for a different reason, right? Like, for whatever reason, Mark Bergevin decided to invest very, very heavily in defensive defensemen. And I think that if you're going to do that, you have to do it with a guy like David Weinbacher. You can't do it with a guy like David Savard. And there are two different players from two different eras, and the David Savard type of era is like kind of being phased out in the NHL. So you have to be able to keep up with the times. And I think Jeff Petry provides a lot more of offensive creativity and a lot more of a boost for somebody like, let's say, Caden Gooley. Let's just say, for the sake of argument, somebody like that. Like, if you want a veteran to help your young players around, like, I don't think you can go too wrong with somebody who has those instincts, who has those offensive, creative instincts. Another thing too is that we have to kind of also remember on the flip side that Jeff Petry is now an additional year older, and he was already getting older when the Canadiens renewed his contract a couple of years ago. So I personally think that they will probably be able to trade Petry a lot easier. So we're going to see Petry traded, and we're going to see Savard stay at Montreal for the next year.
And my thought with that is that if they're keeping him, where does he slot in the lineup here? And that's where things get a little bit, complicated, because I'm looking at
Because
the
he can't
defense.
play on the same side, right?
Yeah, on the right side, if we are saying that they are keeping Petry, that David Savard is out of here. On the right side, there's Chris Weidman, likely bound for the AHL or seventh defenseman. Jonathan Kovacevic, who is a right-handed defenseman or right defenseman. Caden Gooley, Justin Barron. Though Gooley and Harris can both play either side, and then Petry. Matheson's a left defenseman. Jordan Harris can shift over, and then on IR, Arbor Jack can play either spot there. And my thought is that, do you let, Matheson and Gooley play together and let them cook as your top pairing? That is your top pairing, or should be your top pairing, or could be your top pairing. And then do you run like a Jordan Harris and Jeff Petry second pairing, that Harris has that stability, and I think a similar play style with the way that he can skate and move the puck. It isn't always flashy, but is very good at distributing the puck. And then you can make a Jack-Eye and Barron, or Jack-Eye Kovacevic third pairing here if you wanted to. It's trying to find that spot there. But it all is encapsulated by, you have to move David Savard out if you want to have Jeff Petry in the lineup here. Jeff Petry being 3 years older than David Savard is also blowing my mind, because I could have sworn that Savard was older than that, but he's been playing in the league forever too. But on the flip side, I really do think that the Canadiens are going to probably be trading him. It makes the most sense from what they're doing in this rebuild, is that it doesn't take away a lineup spot from someone like Justin Barron or Arbor Jack-Eye, or even Kovacevic, who they very clearly like, or other players who are going to be coming up from the AHL or joining in soon. So I guess my question is now, Laura, they already retained salary on one player, Joel Edmondson. They have 2 spots left. Kent Hughes generally doesn't like to retain salary in trades unless he has to, which I think the Edmondson one was a non-factor. But then we saw him with Hoffman and Pitlick retain nothing. Do you think that he'll use one of those spots, which are valuable for a team that's not going to be good going into the deadline? You like having free spots. Edmondson's will be done after this season. If they retain on Petry, it's 2 more years of retention, and that's at least one spot tied up there. Do we think that he will retain salary on that? Because I think that's the only way he's going to potentially get this done. He's already cheaper now, but if you knock another 25% off of that 25% that's being retained, you're getting a half price Jeff Petry at a discounted asking price too. I'm sure the demand isn't super high.
Well, that's the problem to me, is that the demand isn't high, and I think it's really worth retaining salary if you're getting something that's going to be beneficial for you in the long run back. So whether it's multiple picks or a prospect that maybe needs a change of scenery or something like that, I'd be willing to do it. But is there a team that's willing to pay for that, even with another 25% knocked off of Jeff Petry's salary? Is the question. Like, for me, like, it is worth retaining salary for another 2 years if, at the end of those 2 years you have something to show for it. Unlike the Pittsburgh thing, where like they don't even have any of the players they got back in the Matheson trade, right? And they retain salary on one of them. So like, I don't want it to be a situation like that. But if it's something where the Canadiens are going to be able to make use out of it in the next couple of years, then absolutely 100% I'm for retaining salary, because also we know the cap's going to go up next year. And we also know the Canadiens are a little bit of a distance away from even becoming a playoff team at this point.
And I think that's the thing, is that because they like their flexibility right now. They value that flexibility so much right now, in that you don't want to tie yourself to something longer term that you don't have the flexibility going forward. Because next year we know the cap is rising. We know allegedly the cap is rising. We've been told that for several years in a row. But next year in 2024 is when it is supposed to make that big jump. And if you're a team like the Canadiens who want to be on the cusp of being a playoff team, being a contending team there, you want to have that ability that, we can add. Savard's contract will be off the books if he's not here. Petry's contract will have 1 year left, or he will probably be traded because cap space. Hoffman's gone. Pitlick's gone. You're going to have, and let me go back here to the Canadiens cap friendly page, but you're going to have the opportunity then to add in here. Let's see here. Sean Monahan will likely be traded. Casey DeSmith will be off of there. Samuel Montembeault is UFA. Chris Weidman will be gone. You're in a good spot that you have a lot of this core locked up, and you'll have money to re-sign your important players. It's such a weird spot. Like, I still think that they are absolutely going to trade it, because it does make sense for the longevity of the team here, because coming in on defense, you have Lane Hudson, you have David Reinbacher in the next year. Like, that's not a guess. That is a more than likely thing that will happen. You have Adam Engstrom, you have Logan Mailloux, you have players in the AHL. It makes sense from a financial standpoint. They can get under that cap threshold, or closer to under that cap threshold, which they've been using Carey Price's LTIR since, Kent Hughes started. And if you don't have to rely on that, it's a lot easier to navigate call-ups and doing stuff, and not having a limited pool to work within here. Everything across the board just screams, this is not a long-term thing. He will be gone before long. And I do wonder if he is okay with it. It is, hey, come in, play some games here, and at the trade deadline, we'll retain, get you flipped for teams who might need defense, because injuries pile up in the preseason. Petry could play the entire preseason for the Canadiens and turn around, and all of a sudden, Toronto lost 6 defensemen to getting eaten by raccoons or something like that, and they need a defenseman. That makes sense. The opportunity can arise there. And in our final segment, we've got to tackle everyone's favorite part, trade speculation. Where is Jeff Petry going to potentially end up, and what do we want as a return? We're going to get into all that coming up in our final segment. We are back here at Locked On Canadiens. Of course, we are your daily Montreal Canadiens podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. And now comes the fun part, where we've been discussing the entirety of the Jeff Petry. I don't want to call it a dilemma, but I want to call it a space, a thought, a TED Talk, I guess, whatever we want to call this. The overarching thought, I think, that I've thought, and many fans around the league or the Canadiens fan base have thought, is Jeff Petry is not going to play a game for the Canadiens this year. It seems very intent that he is going to get flipped and traded to another team again. We talked about with some salary retention. I am looking at the rosters and the cap space for a lot of these teams here. And the pool for teams that I think would be willing to take on Petry's contract that have space available is not high. There are two teams that could take him on with no salary retention or wouldn't need that issue, and that's Chicago and Anaheim, of which I don't think he's going to want to go to Anaheim or Chicago with rebuilding teams. But then there's Nashville, Detroit, Buffalo, and Columbus all in one row there. All that could take on his current contract, but I assume the Canadiens would retain a little bit to not eat into that. Detroit came up the last time the Petry rumors came around, and Laura, we know obviously the Petrys are from Detroit. His dad was a famous pitcher for the Tigers. It seems too easy to just go, nope, he's going back to Detroit. He's going to go there, right?
It does, and honestly, I don't even know if Steve Yzerman would want him there. To be honest, it does make sense to a certain extent, but for whatever reason, I'm strongly feeling Carolina. And again, I don't know how he would feel about that.
Here's the thing: is Carolina I could see because good team doesn't have to be the guy on that team, but I know Carolina just if they wanted, Carolina already has a potentially defensively deficient offensive defenseman, two of them actually, in Brent Burns and Tony DeAngelo, and they have $920,000 in cap space. Half of their defense is UFA next year. They have Dmitry Orlov signed for 2 years at 7.7. Jacob Slavin is signed for 2 more years. Brent Burns is signed for 2 more years. But Brady Shea, Brett Pesce, Tony DeAngelo, Caleb Jones, and Jalen Chatfield are all UFA after this season. I don't think anyone's on their IR list here unless I missed. Oh, just Andrei Svechnikov, so that doesn't matter too much. That's actually not a bad shout in there because on right D, they have Brent Burns, they have Pesce, they have DeAngelo, and Caleb Jones can play both. Jalen Chatfield's a right defenseman. The left side, they're set with Orlov, Slavin, and Shea there. That's not a bad idea, honestly. I'm just curious who the Canadiens could take back because their cap space is not big. And there's not exactly a lot on here I would see that would help them get under that cap bump.
Oh
but
God,
for
the
some
Canadiens
reason,
are getting Brent Burns, aren't they?
Here's the thing is I think Brent Burns he has a modified no trade clause, so I'm pretty sure the Canadiens are probably on that list. I know Canadian teams end up on a lot of those lists. I look at Detroit on right D. They have Moritz Seider, who is in the last year of his entry level deal. Gustav Lindstrom. Justin Hall. I didn't know Justin Hall was that's Shane Gostisbehere and Ben Sherrod, who can all play right D or lefty in the later case of those other two players there. I look at some of this and I look at Carolina and I go, I don't even know who I would ask for from that because they need to make the money work. And then another odd thought is, what about Nashville? Because Nashville's got the cap space. They're in that weird little spot there. They're kind of loaded up on right defense, though. Jeremy Lauzon, Dante Fabro, Alexander Carrier, Luke Shen for 3 years, and Tyson Barrie. But they don't have a lot of help on left defense, which unfortunately doesn't really fit what Petry's looking for. I feel like this is going to be a team that we are not expecting here. I think it's going to be a team in the northern part of the U.S. here. I think Carolina is about as far south as you're going to get, mostly because Tampa Bay can't afford them no matter what. They're $6 million over the cap right now. And I don't think Florida wants a space where they're tempted to just run it back. It feels like out of nowhere, he's going to end up as like a Minnesota Wild or like you said, a Carolina Hurricane. And you and I aren't expecting a lot out of this. They already got a second round pick to take him on. If they got like a third round pick or, something like that in a trade for him, are we happy or are we expecting maybe a little bit more out of this then?
It depends on the salary retention question, honestly. If they get rid of him and don't retain any salary for a third rounder, I'd be thrilled.
And that's the thing is, it's like, I can see them making this trade without retaining salary, but I also think that to get it done and to clear that cap space, because the Habs are also very over the cap, $5.1 million over the cap right now with a 22 out of 23 man roster. there are trades coming. We haven't even talked about like what are they going to do with Casey DeSmith or Jake Allen or anything like that, because quite frankly, that's a headache that I do not have time for right now. It I
I
can't
think
wait to see what
Minnesota
this.
Wild is a good one.
It's such a like we know he wants to be closer to his family in the US. I'm pretty sure that's like the part that we know that we have landed on, which is why everyone goes to Detroit first. But Buffalo's got $6 million in cap space. They are over their roster limit right now, and they're loaded on right defense. But at the same time, all their defenses are they're going to be broke as hell next year. I'm giddy thinking about a trade that might not even happen. It's very nice to be able to have this debate here. My thought is I'd like to get back, even if it's, a tweener AHL project player or a prospect player, like along the lines of maybe where Rafael Harvey-Pinardi Alonen was last year. In return would be great. Am I expecting that though? Maybe not really. And there's also the possibility that the Canadiens flip him and then they're just going to keep flipping Jeff Petry with, slower incremental amounts of salary retained here. I think as we get closer to camp, we find out which players are healthy, which players are not. We're going to see action pick up on this. And I know I said this last time. We recorded an episode. It was great. We did all this coverage and everything. And then all of a sudden, there's a trade happening. Now that we have recorded this, it will probably come down the pipeline in rapid succession, which you can thank my luck for on that. Laura, do you have any parting thoughts before we wrap the show today?
Honestly, I just don't want them to. I don't want this to turn into a thing where Petry isn't doing that great in Montreal if he does end up playing here, and then the fans just pile on him, because I don't think that he was as bad as anyone thought over the course of his tenure here. I think he did not get the credit that he deserved. I think that's the best way to phrase that. So I feel like if he does stay here, even though he's probably taken a step back or two due to age, that he does get given a fair shake by the fans.
Yeah, and I would love to have him back. Everyone knows that I'm a huge fan of Jeff Petry on this podcast. I may be one of the few left out of the Montreal Canadiens fan base. In that, my whole thing is like, if he plays well, his value increases. You as folks should want that, especially with this current team here. We're going to see what happens. We know Kent Hughes is cooking something up his sleeve because he always is. That's what he does. And when Kent Hughes finally finishes cooking up this Jeff Petry trade, wherever that may be, we will have you covered here at Locked On Canadiens. If you are following us on the now deceased Twitter, X, whatever, you can follow us at LO_Canadiens. You can follow Laura at The Active Stick. You can follow myself at Scott Matla. We are in a few other places that we are still figuring out. We haven't set up a podcast account on Threads or Blue Sky yet, just because time. You can follow us there. Make sure you subscribe wherever you get your daily podcast and on YouTube so you never miss any of our videos right in your subscription box at midnight when they go live. Everyone, thanks for tuning in, and we will see you all next time.